All right. And we welcome all of you to please introduce yourself in the chat, and please feel free to update your name or add your name into the chat, and tell us what your preferred pronouns are, tell us your organization, and I'll also drop a link in the chat if you're interested in looking up and seeing the native lands for the where you're located. So I'll just put that there in the chat. And want to also introduce you to my colleagues who are joining me on the call today. We're going to be hearing today from Caroline Cook. She is the Water Policy Director at the WaterNow Alliance, and Catherine Baer. She is the Vice President of River Programs at River Network. And just to give you a quick overview of our agenda today, we are going to begin today's workshop with just an overview of the purpose of the building blocks of trust, which is the topic that we're going to be talking about today, and why River Network and WaterNow Alliance work together to seek out and learn about these building blocks of trust, to learn what they are, and tell you a little bit about the process that we use to discover them. Then Caroline and KB are going to review what we learned from local community groups and water utilities through this process. They're going to share some of the real life stories that we heard along the way, and we also want to get your reactions, your reflections, and your questions and your own experiences with building partnerships between community groups and water utilities. Following the overview that KB and Caroline are going to share with us, we are going to then engage in some discussion and sharing, as well as an opportunity for you all to ask questions. So with that, if we could go to the next slide, please. And KB, I'm going to start off by asking you, can you tell us a little bit about what led to the Building Blocks of Trust effort and why River Network and WaterNow Alliance decided to partner on it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think at River Network, we really saw around the country that there were some both really strong relationships between water utilities and community organizations in some places, and in some places, like really a lack of trust, but that in the sort of need for communities to have cleaner waterways, more green infrastructure, more equity and affordability programs across the board, just the opportunity and need to work together was really there. And that's what drove us, is trying to achieve better outcomes for communities in terms of equitable water infrastructure, more funding, et cetera. Really having a community-centered process that was anchored by a strong partnership between the water utility and community organizations. So we really felt like, hey, if there's a way to understand these and seed more of them, that would be a big benefit for our combined network around the country.
Great. So thank you for that context. And so what was the process that River Network and WaterNow Alliance used to carry out this project?
So what we did is we took a bright spots approach. What we were thinking is sort of like, okay, can we learn from what's happening out there? And so we tried to understand, we put out an RFP actually and solicited existing partnerships around the country who were already thinking and doing about this, and had people sort of apply. We were looking for different types of partnerships and relationships, honestly, in communities of different sizes, doing different types of activities and partnerships at different places within their partnership. And so really looked for that. And we knew that we were going to sort of go through a process to learn from them what had worked, what hadn't, how do they build those relationships, what did they learn along the way, and synthesize that into a series of best practices, which is what is contained in the report and we'll be sharing with you today. Yeah, and so I'm going to keep going on this one.
Yeah.
So this was our, when we actually ended up getting the applications in and we were looking for size and geographic diversity, the map represents, you can see the numbers of where the different community partnerships are located that end up being part of what we called our trust work group. And so what we did is we worked with these folks, did some in-depth qualitative interviews, and then took that information, sort of coded it, synthesized it, and then took it back out to our trust working group. They reviewed it with us, and that sort of led to our first draft of our foundations of trust, the principles that you'll see today. We then were able to apply those in a couple places, learn a little bit more, write up the draft, and then have it reviewed by the trust work group, some external reviewers, and come up with a final report that we are sharing with you today. So that was sort of in a nutshell the process we used over the last, and it took about an 18-month process.
Awesome. So one final question before we dive in and hear about everything that we learned along the way. So can you tell us just a little bit about just sort of the constellation, what we call the constellation of practices, and maybe just a little bit about like, what did we learn about, like, is building a trusting, durable partnership a linear process? And like, how do folks know where to start?
Yeah, and Caroline, please jump in here too. I think you have a good way of thinking about this. It's interesting because we were like, okay, is a partnership, are there steps A, B, C? But as we learned from the groups around the country, what we really recognized was that there are a lot of different practices that, we can employ at different times. And sometimes I might need one practice, sometimes I might need three, but they don't necessarily have to be in a certain order. So we really thought of it in this circle of like a constellation, as opposed to sort of a very linear process. What would you add, Caroline?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right in how we were putting this together. And I'll just add, the report is in a linear order because of how you have to write a PDF, I guess. But so in that more linear outline in the report itself, we tried to group them from, the very most fundamental things, like prioritizing transparency and honesty, to the more nuts and bolts, to borrow a phrase from April, kind of concrete practices on, how to formalize a relationship and develop contracts that are not too burdensome, but still provide that same foundational transparency and honesty in those mechanics.
Great. So I'm going to ask Caroline and KB to start walking us through what we learned and share some of the really good stories that we heard along the way. But for the participants in today's call, we're going to ask you for your help along the way too. So before I ask Caroline a question here in just a second, I want to also just ask all of the participants, if you could take a look at your Zoom controls at the bottom, you'll see that there is a reactions button, and there are some emojis that are there. And mine, I don't know what everyone's looks like, but mine has 6 preset ones, and then there's a little 3 dots that I can click on to give more. So as Caroline and KB are sharing these practices, when they finish, we're gonna ask you to pick a reaction that sort of sums up your takeaway of that particular practice or case study. So we'll call on you once we get done, once we go through each of these, to ask for your reaction. So I just wanted to flag that for all of you, so you could be thinking about what kind of emoji you would choose as we walk through these different case studies and best practices. So,
and April, should we use these polls before we get started?
Absolutely. And I apologize that I did not do that already. So yeah, so before we get started, we want to actually just hear a little bit from you two, just to get an idea of who is here today, and also just the areas of interest that you have. So KB, if you could launch our first poll. Yeah, we're just curious, first of all, like, who is here today and what type of organization you represent. So if you could take this poll for us really quickly. Great. It looks like we have a really broad representation of different types of organizations with us today, which is awesome. We'll give everyone just another 2 seconds maybe to participate. So yeah, let's take a look and see what our results are. So we've got several nonprofit organizations, several folks that are representing water utilities, as well as other local, state, or federal government entities. We have some folks here representing philanthropy and business. So awesome. Great to sort of see a great cross section of different organizations represented. And then let's bring up our second poll.
Okay.
So just out of curiosity, if you have have relationships, either if it's yours personally or just your impression of the relationships between your community and your water utility. Where would you say that they fall on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being high trust and 5 being no trust? So we'll give everyone just a few seconds to consider that and weigh in with what you think is your assessment of your community. Looks like most people have had a chance to weigh in. We'll give everyone just a few more seconds and we'll take a look. All right, so it looks like most people are sort of falling in the middle around 3, as sort of had the highest number of votes. And then we have folks that are falling sort of on the high end of the scale, as well as on the no trust end of the scale. So great, thank you all for sharing that. That's really great context for all of us as we sort of start walking through these different best practices that we learned, as well as some of the stories that were shared with us. All right. So if we can move to the first slide, perfect. And I'm going to start off by asking Caroline a question. So Caroline, since we developed a constellation of practices that aren't really applied in any particular order, like you and KB were talking about, as we dig into a few of these in detail, one of the practices that we identified is adopting what we called a community-facing orientation. So can you tell us, Caroline, what does that exactly mean? What does community-facing orientation mean, and how are communities putting that practice, community-facing orientation, into practice?
Yeah, so this practice is really all about water utilities breaking down the proverbial black box to become anchor institutions for the communities. So the example that we wanted to highlight here was New Orleans, where the Sewerage and Water Board is starting to work to be more integrated with the community, so that the utility really is the community and there's not that separation, and that they're meeting folks where they are. So the goal here in New Orleans is to support the growing green infrastructure industry and ensure that the benefits and resources from those investments are going to the folks on the ground in the neighborhoods that need those green infrastructure investments the most, and that those are the folks that are doing the work as well. And so as part of this effort from the Sewerage Board, we learned really that they had created these flexible staff roles that allowed the staff to spend time with the community members, getting out into the community to really cultivate that trust and credibility. And their partner, Healthy Community Services, works with the Sewerage Board in those efforts to really give residents and business owners a better understanding of urban stormwater management techniques, particularly green infrastructure, how the drainage system works in New Orleans. Each system is different, and New Orleans has its own unique challenges. How to improve the water quality in Lake Pontchartrain, and really how green infrastructure can help reduce subsidence by increasing, water tables. So a lot of good partnership opportunities, again, as the utility opens up their doors and engages with the community on a regular basis. And something on a related note that won't be surprising to anyone, and we've talked about this a little bit, but we also heard from all the partnership groups that trusting relationships really do depend on mutual honesty and transparency. And because trust is so fragile, those ingredients of honesty and transparency need to underscore all of the ways that the groups, community groups and utilities engage with each other. And so we found that community facing utility really has that transparency aspect built into it.
Great. All right, so go ahead.
Feel free to add on to that.
Oh, yeah, no, I think that you covered that one. I don't have anything to add to this one right now. Yeah.
Great. All right, so thanks for that overview, Caroline. So we want to get folks' reaction to that. So using your emoji reactions, what emoji would you pick to sort of summarize what your perception is of that case study and that building block of trust? Great.
Oh, I see some hearts and a clapping hand. That's good. Lots of thumbs up. Great.
Perfect.
Another
All right.
clapping hand.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks.
Great.
Good to see that positive feedback.
Yeah, thanks everyone. So for the next one, we're actually not going to use emojis. We're going to use either a word or a phrase that sort of sums up your impression of this one. So keep that in mind as I now turn the next question over to KB. So actually, the next question, I want to actually ask this one to you too, Caroline, sorry. So how are these relationships built? And what role does understanding each other's goals and finding mutual or shared goals play in both establishing and really maintaining these relationships long-term?
Yeah, among the key ingredients that we heard for trusting relationships, there was a strong consensus that recognizing and leveraging shared goals for the mutual benefits was really important. So this allows community groups and utilities to reach their common goals, but in some cases also achieve things that they couldn't have done on their own. So the example that we have here is in Cleveland. So like many Great Lakes cities, Cleveland's population has been on the decline while poverty rates are on the rise. So the city's current population is less than half of what it was in 1950. And many of the remaining residents really are unfortunately facing extraordinary financial challenges. So it's in this overall context that CHN Housing Partners, the local community group, and Northeast Ohio Regional Sewerage District work together to help utility customers pay their sewer bills. So in practice, the sewer district contracts with CHN to manage applications for several of the cost savings programs that are really designed to reduce financial burden and the risk of disconnection. So, and those programs are particularly focused on customers affected by low income or other life events like illness or death in the family. So by partnering with that local organization that's known in the community for helping residents, the sewer district has that trusted community liaison that they're able to connect with the eligible customers. But the partnership also furthers CHN and the utility shared goal of improving the utility's engagement with the utility while also expanding the reach of those utility customer assistance programs. And we really think that this work in Cleveland exemplifies another of the trust practices. You questioned, April, about the long-term connection and the durability of the relationship. And so that practice is cultivating long-term community relationships with intention. So CHN and the sewer district do have a long-standing relationship that they've developed over many years and are continuing to expand, even now through their Water Champions program that launched in 2020, 2021, and is going to continue to expand into this year. So CHN advises that to keep those types of long-term partnerships going, the communications need to both, include day-to-day things, nuts and bolts, again, borrow your phrase, but also longer-term, bigger picture planning on a quarterly or semi-annual basis, so that the groups really can stay aligned as they look into the future.
Great. So curious to get folks' reaction to this practice and this particular example. So what we're going to do now is called a chatterfall exercise. So what we'll ask you to do is in the chat, don't hit enter yet, but just type in a word or a short phrase that sort of sums up your takeaway from that practice and that in that particular case study. And then we'll ask everybody to all hit enter at the same time, and we'll kind of get a little waterfall of takeaways or impressions that people have of this particular case study and practice. So we'll give everybody just a few seconds to think of your word or phrase, and then we'll ask everybody to share it. So I'll count down here in just a minute. All right, on the count of 3, 3, 2, 1. Everyone, please hit enter. Let's see what your phrases are.
Oh, that's great. I love this. This is one of my favorite like Zoom activities. We've got got lots of really good ones. Collaboration and empathy. That's definitely something we heard a lot. Mutually beneficial. That's really great. Inspiring. That's what I was going to write. So I agree with you all on that one. Intentional, which is great. Excellent. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. All right, KB, so I'm going to turn this next question to you.
Right.
So sometimes relationships between water utilities and community organizations aren't what we want or need them to be. So can you talk about what we learned about what can be done when there isn't full confidence or there is a lack of trust, and how it can be restored and repaired and rebuilt?
Yeah, absolutely. This was one of the sort of areas which just we didn't know that this was going to be the story when we first included Santa Cruz as part of this example, but it just was so helpful and enlightening in sort of a deep way. But, because when trust has been broken, or for whatever reason it's low between a community and a water utility, sometimes it is really challenging to sort of figure out how to get it back, but it could be also like a real opportunity. So I think, overall, there had to be that sense of like that there was a reason, acknowledgement that trust is low, and that, hey, it's worth bringing it back and investing the time to make that happen, which going in is probably going to be sort of a long-term process. And also on both sides, and I think one thing that's important about all these trust practices is that you can see from the circles, there are things for the community organization to consider, things for the water utility to consider, and things for both of us to consider. It's really important, either way. And so, but for both sides in here, being really willing to listen and potentially take new approaches and sort of like, take down your guard. So in Santa Cruz, what happened is there was a really controversial, what ended up being a controversial desalination project that after a community outcry and opposition, the city council and the water department decided to scrap. And Santa Cruz is in an area which is really vulnerable to drought for a number of reasons. And so the community did have to figure out how they're going to have secure and sustainable water supply. But so they said, okay, hey, let's go back to the table and just take a whole different approach. And so the city council said, okay, we're going to have a more community-centered process. We want to set up a water supply advisory committee. And so that's what they committed to and did. They hired a new water utility director, and this was someone who just had a history and experience really working on community engagement processes. And the city was also willing to support a third-party neutral facilitator. And so this water supply advisory committee was made of about 14 community members from throughout the community, and they engaged in this pretty long 18 month to 2 year process to actually understand how their water system works, what are the issues, and really work through a bunch of scenarios. And to the water utilities, real credit, they were completely transparent. They provided information, whatever the committee needed about, what would this look like? What would this look like? So they could actually play with it. They had held a lot of community forums and invited people to bring in their own ideas, like what would you do to solve our water security issues? And so it just kind of created this real community-centered, interesting process where people felt like they were listened to because they were being listened to, and people were sort of open-minded and were able to work through some of the issues. So by the time they hit the end of their process, they came up with a series of recommendations that were essentially principles about how to address water supply and how to go through a decision tree of which projects to follow, which ones not to follow and pursue. And so by the end, it was unanimous adoption, and that sort of sense of trust really spilled over into the future and sort of just continued on, and to some other local government processes in that area as well. And I think the water utility director who we interviewed basically said, you know, a perfect project is one that you can get done. So, you know, even if you think it's a perfect project, but like the community's not on board, it's not tenable in the same way. So Santa Cruz is a great example, I think, of rebuilding trust pretty intentionally through this open, transparent process where they really thought deeply about sort of how to make that an engaging two-way process.
Great. Caroline, anything you would add?
No, I think that was a perfect summary of Santa Cruz. Really good story.
Yeah. So curious to get the reaction of everyone who's on the call today. So we'll use our emojis this time. If everybody could just pick an emoji that sort of sums up your impression of that case study and that best practice, we'd love to just see what your impressions are.
I like that, a smiley heart. Yeah. That one's called with heart eyes. I like it.
Yeah, this is great. All right. Fantastic. Well, thanks everyone for, yeah, awesome. Great emoji choice. Thank you for playing along and letting us, giving us your impressions. Perfect, thank you. All right, so KB, another question for you. So when relations start off as more personal, say like between two people who just know each other because of their involvement in the community or in similar community organizations, how do those relationships get more formal or operationalized?
Yeah, it's a good question, right? Because often, I mean, I can remember being in that place where, like, you know, you're working with someone and it's great, and then like, okay, so what's next? You know, will it live on through the organization? And so thinking about how you move from these personal to more formalized relationships, that ended up being something we saw that was really helpful. And so moving to like a more formalized relationship also, you know, just does help institutionalize what started as an individual trusting relationship and making it sort of just live on. So that was super important. And there were different ways that we saw water utilities and community organizations do that. And it could look anything from sort of like an MOU of how to coordinate and collaborate, or it could be something even more formal like a contract. Some organizations have been working together for a number of years, having a whole governance structure of how they work together. And so it was a balance, right, of, you know, wanting to have something that would institutionalize it, but not having something that would be overly burdensome. And so Tucson Water and the Sonora Environmental Research Institute, or SERI, are an example of a group who did this. And so SERI, who's a community organization, was really focused on environmental justice, neighborhood health, trying to support low-income communities, and they had a strong record of supporting marginalized communities in Tucson through a number of programs, but including working on energy efficiency and weatherization programs. And so Tucson Water sort of knew that they were a good partner to work with communities and reach some communities have been underserved by Tucson Water in a way that Tucson may not have been able to. And so when the water department and SERI first started working together sort of in those initial relationships, and then they were able to develop a contract, the water department with SERI to formalize it and really, you know, pay and compensate the organization for their services. Specifically, the Tucson Water has a program, a rainwater harvesting program. And so it's a program and it has a rebate, but they found out that a lot of the low-income members of the community weren't able to access it. So they were working on this low-income rain harvesting program. So SERI administered that. They do it by contracts. They actually are paying SERI to do that, and they've had really good uptake as a result. And this also overlaps sort of with what Caroline was talking about in terms of that mutually beneficial relationship, because the rainwater harvesting program was designed to reduce stormwater runoff, increase water conservation by reducing potable water use, outdoor water use, and also help the growth of shade trees, so to reduce that urban heat island impact that we're seeing increasingly in many places. So that was just like, they had this great partnership that sort of was wonderful for the community. It was good for SERI, it was good for Tucson Water, and sort of helped with these bigger initiatives too. But it was really, they did need that sort of formalization, and I think the compensation, so, making sure that we're thinking about the, community groups sometimes will volunteer, but also need to be compensated when they're doing real work. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Caroline, what else would you add from that story?
No, I think that was a great summary. I just really like the combination of the equity focus and water use efficiency, green infrastructure focus, and it just brings together everything that WaterNow thinks about all the time. So I love this example.
Great.
Yeah.
So we'd love to get your impressions. So we'll do another chatter fall. So if everyone could think of a word or a phrase that sort of sums up your impression of this partnership example or this building block, we'll give everyone just a few seconds to think of your word and type it in, and then I'll do a countdown and we'll all share our impressions. All right. So on the count of 3, 3, 2, 1. Great. Perfect. Thank you all so much. See a lot of social capital. That's great, Shannon.
Intentional.
Yep. Purposeful.
Encouraging. Yeah, thank you. Okay. Yeah. Wow. Nice.
Intention. Yeah, intention shows up here a lot, it seems like. Yeah. Great. All right. So Caroline, KB, thank you so much for walking us through some of those examples. So what we want to do now is turn it over to all of you, everyone who's participating in the call today, to ask Caroline and KB questions. So you're welcome to ask your question in the chat. You're welcome to come off mute and just ask it verbally. If you want to raise your hand, you can do it that way. However you feel comfortable. We have a pretty manageable size crowd here today. So ask your questions any way that you want. And maybe while we're waiting on folks to ask their question, Caroline and KB, when you think about this process and what we learned from the different case studies, what would you say are like some of the common threads between where community groups and utilities were able to partner with each other? Like depending on if they came from a place of where there was already trust established, where there wasn't any relationship at all, or places where trust had been eroded. What would you say are some of the common threads between all the examples that we heard from?
You want to go first?
Well, one that comes to mind, and I don't want to take yours, KB, but and relates to the example you gave about moving from personal to more formalized, is what we heard from everyone, and was it really each of the partnerships started from some sort of personal relationship. Either folks met at an event and just started a conversation, or there was an example, I believe it was Healthy Community Services, of asking to borrow some equipment and tools from the utility for an event they were having, and really just getting things started just by having a conversation, which I thought was really interesting to hear from everyone, because that's a question that we hear a lot when we talk about this project, is how do you get started? And it really was just from getting out into the community and talking to each other. Yeah. Nothing magic about it, I guess.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah. And I think I would add, April, was feels to me that one other thing that was a common thread was that sense of intentionality, which people talked about in the chat that came through, but also being honest about your time and capacity on both sides. And so we saw, for example, in a couple of places where water utilities had a staff person who was really a decent amount of the time was actually focused on sort of community engagement and outreach. It wasn't just sort of an additional thing. So having that flexibility in staff roles, and the same thing on the community organization side, an organization has to be realistic. Hey, do I have time to engage on this? If I do, that's great. But if I don't go in and overpromise. So just thinking carefully about being intentional with your capacity and time and honest about it.
Yeah, thank you both. So we have a few questions that are coming up in the chat. So Lindsay asked, where are you taking this information next, or who else needs to hear about it?
Go
Yeah.
ahead.
We're taking it on the road. So yeah. We're going to talk more at the end about an opportunity we have to work with a lot more groups, and we hope that maybe you all, maybe someone to share that or be among them. But we're definitely want to share this out as widely as we can with groups who are interested. So we already have a couple of conferences lined up, but would love to hear from everyone here. Really, like, where do you think we could reach the most people who would really benefit from this?
Yeah, we'd love to hear what you all think would be where this would be beneficial to share. You can share it in the chat. You can come off mute. You can email us, whatever you think, but we'd love your ideas about where you think, who you think needs to hear this and where it needs to be shared. Nicole has a question. What advice do you have for building a genuine connection with a community group?
Some of the things, we heard from different participants in this group was, be willing to throw out the playbook. It's not a checklist for community engagement. It's like sort of has to be, the water utilities who are really doing this felt like, it wasn't just part of their job. Like they're like, we are the community, right? And so almost like breaking down the barriers between, hey, I'm the water utility, I'm the community organization. That felt like one of them, and sort of being willing to meet people where they are. We had the one who sticks with me is a water utility staffer who told me that she would go to rock climbing gyms for some reason. That's where she made a lot of connections with community members. I don't know why, but she was just like out there thinking about really creative ways to meet people, and then getting to the next stages of like, well, what are the important community values, and thinking about really being community centered in decision making is one of the other sort of practices in figuring out ways to actually engage community members in decision making in an honest way. But are there boards, advisory groups? We had examples of a couple of those in the report that really went a long way towards creating a constructive, ongoing relationship between the utility and the organization. Yeah. What else, Carolyn?
Yeah, I think that all resonates with me. I would just add as well, we heard from a couple of utilities and the community groups that it was really important to get out ahead of bad news, so that you're not just sharing out like all the great stuff the utility is doing and the clean water it's providing for the community, but acknowledging upfront any missteps or things that are coming down the pipeline that might not be so great, so that you can work with the community so folks can understand the impacts, but that you really are making it a mutual relationship, that you're sharing both good and bad news.
Yeah. So Kristen is asking if we have any examples of community advisory groups like the one that Santa Cruz convened being compensated for their time and expertise. Great question.
That is a good question.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I don't think I'm remembering any of the examples in our cohort, but it's definitely something that we've heard about, that community centered decision-making processes and comments about compensating for time or adjusting the approaches to reflect different schedules and ability to show up at a meeting after work that you might not be able to do. You have childcare or other responsibilities. So it's definitely something that was part of the discussion, but I'm not remembering off the top of my head if any of them compensated for the time.
Yeah, I'm not sure either.
Yeah, I think what you raise is really important, Kristen, and I think there's definitely increasing recognition that that's a really important practice, and maybe that's something that we can look to find some additional examples of that, because it is such an important practice, and where that practice is being practiced. So thanks for raising that. Nancy, Nancy's curious about where to begin when there is a strong resistance to public input in general at the utility, if there just seems to be resistance within the utility for public engagement or public input.
Well, one thing I would say is we had an interesting discussion with our working group, and at one point one of the utilities said, there is a threshold to these. You have to, if you're going to develop a partnership, right, there has to be interest on both sides and some sort of like, you know, baseline before it to work. So recognizing that like it's not going to work in all places necessarily. But I would say to your question specifically, Nancy, in terms of the input, you know, I'm thinking of one example where the community organization, you know, she had a fine relationship with the utility, but there wasn't much there. And so she just started inviting them to everything. She's like, I'm going to invite you to my steering committee meetings and my festivals and my boards, and I'm going to come to your meetings. And she just was like, I'm going to be there and you're going to be at my things and we're going to learn from each other. And so she kind of just like was able to demonstrate like there was value and overlap in what they were doing, and now they do have this really interesting partnership and relationship. And the utility staffer looks to her for input often when they're about to make a decision. So that's kind of some of the opportunities I think about. I don't know, April and Caroline, what you're thinking of as well.
Yeah, one thing that comes to mind too is we heard both from utilities and the community groups that on getting started, that deepening the community understanding of just what the utility does and what their roles and responsibilities are, as a way to, you know, help build that conversation. So, you know, I think that would be an important one, that if you're not really hearing each other and talking, and the community group and the utility are kind of talking past each other, then, you know, making an effort to really get in there and do a tour of the utility. We heard from a few of the utilities that they host tours to help communities better understand what it is they do, would be one that I would think could help with those types of more difficult conversations and creating that baseline that KB mentioned. You know, there's got to be interest.
The other thing I would mention is that there were a few examples of where new leadership often opened up doors and opportunities to start fresh. And so if that situation arises, you know, and if there's somebody new taking over leadership roles within the utility, that to make sure to reach out to them and start a dialogue about your organization and what you do and your interest in the utility. All right, so Katie, Katie says, first of all, thank you for this. Thank you, Katie, for being here. She wonders if we have ideas about how these lessons extend if there is not an active community-based organization. So yeah, what happens if there's not an active community organization to sort of step in to these roles like CHN or the advisory committee?
Yeah, I think of two sort of things, Katie, in that regard. And one is, you know, it's interesting in our mix of groups we had in our advisory group, the community organizations, some of them were, you know, very much water focused groups, but others were focused on health, housing, sort of other, you know, intersectional areas. And so that's one thing I would think, like, okay, there could be a group out there that's working on something that you not necessarily think, hey, this is my water group, but could be very instrumental in being a bridge, or could expand to water, or really does have an interest in water. It's just not the primary one. So that's one thing. And then the other is our case study in Harper's Ferry, West Virginia. It was actually the West Virginia Rivers Coalition, which is a statewide organization, but they had a staffer who lived, you know, relatively close to Harper's Ferry and was able to sort of be the local role and also engaging more local community members. And so, you know, they might have ended up with a local group there, but there's still ways to engage in if there's not a group like right there, I would say, in some cases.
Great.
Yeah, that I'll just emphasize the looking past just dedicated water groups. One of our pilot projects was the partnership with the utility and a neighborhood organization, very hyper local. They do many more things than water, but we're making sure that lead service lines in a particular neighborhood were getting replaced through the utility program. So just to reiterate KB's point on that.
Thanks. Claire, to answer your question, yes, this presentation will be available. We're recording the session and we'll share the recording out to everyone who registered. And so yes, it'll be available. And then we do definitely hope to have some future presentations as well. And again, if any of you have ideas of where you would recommend would be good opportunities to share this information, we'd love to have your ideas. So feel free to put those in the chat or email them to us. We have, let's see, we still have a good bit of time. So, and we have questions that are still coming in. So I'm gonna keep bringing questions to you and KB and Caroline, unless you want to move on to some of the questions that we have for the audience. What's your preference?
Yeah, I think we can do a mix if it works for you all. Be great to hear from some of the audience members if they want to come off mute or type in the chat. We had a few questions that we had for you all on, whether your communities have done any of these things, or similarities with the case studies, or maybe some differences, some things that we haven't highlighted today. And I think we've gotten some of those. It'd be great to hear any more of, differences or things we've missed. And I see Katie mentioned in the chat around state organizations, which I think is a great addition. And we talked about already the idea of compensating for participation and public input.
Yeah, we're definitely looking to add to our case studies and have more examples. So yeah, if y'all are have these sort of relationships or you've seen successful partnerships, we'd love to know about it. Yeah.
Oh, I think Nicole has her hand up. Go ahead, Nicole.
Yeah, thanks. And I don't know if this is necessarily the same type of community interactions, but we have found success with teacher trainings. So helping the local school districts in our service area, helping the science teachers learn more about the work of a water utility so that they can then help their students understand it. And also many times they are also our customers. So just seeing them as another anchor institution. And it was kind of it started off as just a partnership with another nonprofit organization that was doing the teacher trainings. And then the school districts actually started coming to us to get us involved with the teacher trainings. So that's, I think, was an unexpected community connection that has, it's hard to know how successful it's been, but it's provided some interesting insights into where the disconnection is between a water utility and what we think our customers or community know and what they actually know.
That's great. Is the curriculum for elementary age or older students?
All of the above. So most of the teacher training, we do high school and elementary, middle school. It really depends on what the school districts are looking for.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that.
Yep.
Let's see. I can't see everyone on my same screen. I don't see any other raised hands. And there's a mention in the chat of Seattle Public Utilities shape our water plan. So we'll look into that. Thank you for flagging that as a compensated advisory group. So I don't know, April, if there were other questions that KB and I can answer that we didn't get to yet.
Yeah, so Lindsay's asking, how do you approach utilities who technically engage in public input, but who actually show no interest in making those audiences bigger for like use sort of the same channels of promotion, but like, for instance, no translation to other languages besides English, or accessibility offerings, or no direct outreach, those kinds of, that there's an assumption that everyone who really wanted to be here is already here, but maybe that's not really true. How do you sort of open up the conversation so that there's translation and interpretation, and that there's the word's getting out in different ways than sort of the ways that have been typically used in the past.
You know, I don't think that was something we had that came up directly in the case studies that I'm thinking across, but I'm sort of thinking about going back to some of the mutual benefits. And so, you know, both, well, two things, like to the extent that things like this, like case studies, are helpful, having examples of other utilities who are opening up accessibility in different ways can be really helpful. To sort of show that there is a benefit to it and it can be done. You know, it's not overwhelming, it's not a barrier in itself. So there may be those of you who are doing that now who could speak to that, which would be really helpful. And then thinking about also, like, you know, what are the benefits? You know, they're there, like having this increased community engagement. There's a mutual benefit for the utility, and so trying to help the utility understand that, right? That it's a net positive for the community and the utility, instead of just like one more thing to do.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, on the community facing orientation block that we were talking about at the beginning, is one of the steps to that was on the community group side, was making that offer. I mean, certainly it has to be accepted, but making the offer to provide those services that if you're able to, and it's within the community group's wheelhouse to do those translation, or, you know, provide that support to the utility. Maybe they just don't know how to do it, and need that capacity from the community. So that's something that comes to mind. Although this specific thing, as KB said, didn't come up in the discussions we had, but that would be what I would flag as, you know, approaching them and seeing if you can, you know, build that capacity for the utility, maybe because they may not have it internally, just the ability to do that.
Okay.
These are really great questions, and really appreciate everyone who's on the call today asking such thoughtful, good questions and sharing your reactions and your experience as well. KB, can we turn it over to you now to share this opportunity that we have to sort of go deep on some of these learnings and share with everyone what that opportunity is?
Yeah, I'm super excited that we actually have like a follow-up. It's often, you know, like, hey, what's next? So you'll see on this awesome QR code, as well as the link there, and we'll put it in the chat as well. But we currently have an RFP open for new joint applications from community organizations and water utilities who are jointly seeking support to work together to sort of strengthen their relationships together. And so what this is, you come in together, think about some of these practices that you'd like to work on specifically, and it includes sort of either a financial or other sort of leadership training value of $6,000 per participant, and it'll be sort of over a 8-month period from March to October, roughly. And so we're really just looking for new partnerships who are like, hey, we're working together, but we'd like to strengthen that. We'd like to figure out ways to do it better, to expand our partnership, to make it deeper. And so this is a really great opportunity right now that's open, and you'll receive coaching support from WaterNow Alliance, River Network, and some outside leadership development support. So it's pretty multifaceted, and so I hope you will consider applying, certainly if you're interested, and or sharing with your network, so we can get some great groups in to support and sort of learn more about how we can apply these processes to seed more of these really valuable partnerships. Is that anything to add on that, y'all? And the deadline is February 28th. That's the other thing, the end of the month.
Yeah, and I'm going to put in the link in the chat, a link to an evaluation form. We'd love to get your feedback on this presentation today as we look towards as sharing this information again in the future. Your feedback will be really helpful in terms of what else we could do, what other information we could provide, other ways that we could share the information that would be helpful. So I'm going to put that in the chat. And as you go to that link, if you have any final questions for KB and Caroline or myself, Kristen's asking, what's the time commitment like for the program?
Yes. Okay. Caroline, April, help me here. I think we said it was several hours a month of sort of working on this process, and then like with your partner, and then 1 to 2 hours either with us or with a cohort of other groups. So is that?
Yeah, that sounds right. Part of the application is thinking through what the community and utility partnership can commit to it. So we have asked for an estimate of, the time capacity that the partnerships have.
Yep, and if you go to the link, there's a pretty detailed list of what community groups and utilities are expected to, what the expectation is in terms of like what the commitment is. So be sure to check that out, because it's pretty detailed in there. And also we hope that it's also pretty accessible, that it can make sense for a lot of groups in terms of it. We know that all of you, that everyone who's doing this work on the utility side and the community group side is trying to do a lot. And so we want it to be, we want it to be accessible, but we also want to be just really upfront in terms of what we think the time commitment really will be too.
Yeah.
All right, so we'd love for you all to please take the evaluation.
Yep.
And also want to give a really quick plug for 2 conferences that are coming up. So Caroline, do you want to talk really quickly about WaterNow's conference that's coming up in April?
Our annual summit is in April. It will be, as of right now, COVID permitting, in person in Philadelphia at the Inn at Penn. So it'll be a convening of around 200, 150 utility and community groups. We'll be talking about this work, but we'll also be talking about new federal funding and lots of other sustainable water and equity focused sessions. So you can, I'll put the link in the chat. Registration is open and it's April 13th and 14th.
Great. And River Rally registration just opened up today. It's happening June 4th through the 7th in Washington, D.C. I think there's 5 different tracks of information, and it's going to be a really great program. We're very excited. Our fingers are crossed, and also are our toes, that by June that gathering together in person will be possible. And I'm really looking forward to being with all of our friends again in person. So we hope that you'll check out River Rally and see if it might be something that you'd like to attend, because we'd love to see you there. All right, so I think we're at time. Just a few final reminders. We will be sending you an email that has a link to the recording. We'll share back these links that we shared today as well. Caroline and KB, I will turn it over to you to have the final word and to just say thanks to everyone for being here. It was great to be with you all today.
Yeah, thank you. Just great conversation, and really look forward to, hope to see some of y'all, and apply for the RFP. It'd be great to work with you further, and please be in touch if you have questions or ideas.
Yes, thank you. And thanks, April, for facilitating and moving us along today.
Yeah, thanks, KB and Caroline, for sharing all the information. And thanks all of you for being here. It's great to see all of you, and hopefully we'll see you all again soon. Have a great rest of your day.
Take care. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.